Oofa! That is not the kind of game you want to watch on a Saturday night. We're going to cover the late game loss by the Brooklyn Nets at the hands of the short-handed LA Clippers, and also dive in on Kevin Durant's post-game comments, wake-up call, we think, for the boys in Brooklyn, and also what we saw from late-game rotations, options available, and why this is always couched in the sky is not falling yet, Doug.
Yeah, really frustrating loss. Good to have a couple days in between this one to sort of break down what happened, because I was definitely not in the mood to do it Saturday night, because it's just a brutal loss. We get into all the reasons why, sort of on a macro and micro level, going to talk about it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Oh, you've got the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Arbrecht. He is Doug Norrie, and this is a disappointing start to 2022, Doug, as we thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. 120, 116 on a Saturday night. The Brooklyn Nets fall to the LA Clippers, a shorthanded LA Clippers team, might I add, in pretty disappointing fashion from everything that this game laid out, Doug. I don't think we anticipated it going this way. And it's, I say, frustrating, I think, is the theme of this one from not only the two of us on the podcast, but also inside the Nets locker room.
Yeah, this was it was weird. I was kind of shocked by the time I got to the ending, because it was, I think we were maybe even doing victory laps through text during the, like, near the end of the game. They're up 13, 6 minutes left. It looks like they're in control. This is exactly the kind of game a team like the Nets that have Kevin Durant and Harden sort of playing at their best right now, or playing really, really well, really should never lose. And there's reasons for it, but it just completely slipped away. It was frankly just a complete choke. That's the word for it. They choked. And I think essentially Durant and company said the same thing. They didn't use that word, but they might as well have. They just, phrased it a little differently after the game. But it's nothing short of just a choke on a game where they had no business losing that game. The Clippers are crazy shorthanded. The Nets are basically full strength at this point, and they're just winning in the fourth quarter at home. Everything sets up where they just never should have dropped that one, making it back-to-back losses. We'll talk about why, but yeah, really, really disappointing to kind of not come out there with a W.
Yeah, going to get into a Kevin Durant quote and then examine some of the rotations and late game sequences, how it happened, man, because it's flabbergasting in a lot of ways. Because like you said, 13-point lead at about the 6-minute mark in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Then you said mostly healthy. You have Kevin Durant back. You have James Harden back. That should be more than enough to take care of the Clippers. You lose Patty Mills late, picking up his 6th foul, so he fouls out. And at that point, the Nets still have a 7-point lead. And then it just kind of crumbles around them. We want to get to that, but I think before we do, we talked about this, like you said, through text messages. You see Twitter reacting to it, fans reacting to it. We always couch especially the losses, because there's so few of them for the Nets, in this idea of, hey, listen, we're not going to overreact to it. And I don't think that we did. It was a really disappointing loss. But then you hear the way the Nets talk about it, and you hear the way specifically Kevin Durant talks about it. And I think it's a good sign out of a loss like this that it did not fall short in the locker room as far as the level of frustration and disappointment you should have around something like this.
Yeah, look, I don't know if you're going to put the quote up, but
I will.
Yeah, let's do that now. Okay, yeah. So, and if you're on YouTube, you can see it, and if you're with us on the podcast, I'll just read it quickly for you. This is Kevin Durant and part of his post game, which is a really honest and frankly refreshing post game from him, considering his loss. He said, "We didn't deserve to win this game. We came in here with a effed up attitude to start, thinking we were just going to walk into a W." I thought that was okay. So there's two things about this. One, it's bad that they had this attitude. Like, this is that part is bad, and but it's sort of understandable, I think. So I can kind of forgive it. But the fact that he puts it into words and basically explains it that way makes you at least realize that it's more unlikely it's less likely to happen again, I guess, if we're going to take a positive out of it. If we're going to take this positive out of, you can't take teams for granted, especially kind of just like good organizations like the Clippers who have players and they're really well coached. And so you just
got
can't.
James Ennis the third, for crying out loud.
And Wenyen Gabriel, a couple ex-Nets. But it's encouraging to hear that you appreciate the honesty. You wish it hadn't happened that way. You would have liked it to have said, okay, we're just going to come in here and we're going to run these guys out of the gym and get out of here, because that should have been sort of the walking order. But to at least recognize it late from Durant or afterwards, I at least feel like we are, not going to see it again, that they're going to really kind of double down on this. Now, there's other issues why they lost, but at least from an attitude standpoint, from Durant's standpoint, he's clearly like so pissed that they lost. And now they lost back-to-back games. But I think that's still, that quote still kind of rings on the positive side for me, because at least it's a recognition of sort of what went wrong on a macro level.
Yeah, first time with the back-to-back losses. And you're right. And I see, and this isn't me giving an explanation, but I think it's a lot easier to couch coming out flat and assuming you're going to get a win after the stretch that the Nets went through, where you didn't have James Harden, then you didn't have Kevin Durant, you played with a bunch of rookies, then you played with a bunch of backup veterans, and you were still winning games, right? So I think from that standpoint, when you come into this one, it's true for, James Harden had a triple-double and did it pretty early on in this game. When you get both these guys back, it's really less, by the way, about Kevin Durant and James Harden so much as all the players around them. But I could understand overall the team going, oh, we got Kevin Durant and James Harden back, and then the Clippers are beat up. Let's just go ahead and get a W here. And you always have that sense of urgency, especially this team seems to all year long. It starts with Durant. But I get it after this handful of games kind of coming in and going, well, now that we're healthy, why should we? Right. There's even less of a reason to be concerned about playing the Clippers.
And the Nets, the harsh reality for the Nets this season is that they are going to have the bullseye on their back nearly every game. They're the odds-on favorite right now to win the championship. They have two of the best players in basketball. People are talking about them. They have Kyrie coming back. Like, their name is in the national spotlight right now. Everyone knows when they're playing the Nets that these are, the game's on national television because it's on NBA TV. Like, there's a lot of things that are going to happen with the Nets where teams are just going to want to beat them. We saw that with Embiid on Friday too, right? Embiid wanted to beat the Nets bad, right? And he let them know at the end of the game. And Durant was cool with it. And they jawed back and forth for a little bit. And, Durant said it's all in competition. No one's really mad. But you can see this heightened sense from the opponents that, like, they know who they're playing too. And the Nets are going to have to deal with that all season long. So I think that the recognition from Durant and everybody else to say, okay, like, this was a nice little wake up call. Hopefully they're able to actually do something about it and, maybe blow a team out for once. They can't seem to do that ever. And I hope that's the case, because it's just not going to stop. This is going to be like this all season. With everyone knows that they're playing Kevin Durant and James Harden. They're going to bring their very best every single game, even if it's like Reggie Jackson and Terrence Mann and Amir Coffey, right? Like, they're going, right. The effort is going to be there from their teams no matter what. And so the hope here, beyond some of the X's and O's stuff, which I know we're going to get to here in a second, but because these are actually things maybe the Nets can't fix in the short term, but at least from an attitude adjustment wise, I hope this is a thing that says, hey, it doesn't matter who's coming in here. We just have to dial it up the entire game, or else this can happen, because it's a freaking embarrassing loss.
Well, and I think that's the other piece to take away from this too, is you say from an attitude standpoint coming in, because yes, you're going to have the target on your back. Everyone wants to give you their best shot, but the way that you really pour water on that is by coming out and being Kevin Durant and James Harden, then collectively the team overall. If you bury a team early, and I mean really bury them, that should be enough to at least kind of take some of the wind out of the sails. It's the NBA and teams make runs, but we've seen that with some consistency too, because as you said, the Nets don't blow teams out. They've been up 20. They've been up 25, and they still find themselves winning games by 4 or 5 points at the end of it. So I think we probably, if we went back, could say there's a little bit of writing on the wall about the Nets not getting complacent over the course of a game against a bad team they should get a win against. And you usually see it and sometimes gloss over it because they still win. But when you have 20 or 25 point leads, 15 point leads in a game, and you have Kevin Durant, James Harden, it shouldn't be a thing where the team comes back against you. Likewise, with a little over 6 minutes to go, you're up 13. It really shouldn't matter that Patty Mills gets his 6th foul and goes out of the game. You should not lose that game to the Clippers on a Saturday night. It's not the end of the world, but you prefer it to be the last time that we have this type of conversation around a game like this. Going to get into what the Nets did, what Nash did with rotations late in this one that maybe helped contribute to the Clippers' comeback. But first, Doug, Built Bar.
Oh, baby. New year, New Year's resolution. He's got to get healthy. I know what that's like. Maybe you went a little overboard over the holidays. I know I did. It's time to turn to Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but it's got the stats, the healthy stats to back it up, to know that you can, it's indulging, but it's also healthy for you, so you can feel good about it when you're powering them down. They started with the flavors: peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, just some of the many. I mean, there's a ton of Built Bar flavors. You can go over to built.com and figure out which one's going to be your favorite, because there's many to choose from. Then you look at the stats for Built Bar: 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, add in 17 grams of protein. That's the analytics you want behind your protein bar. If you go to built.com right now, you use the promo code LOCKED15, locked like our podcast network, and 15 for the 15% off you're going to get. You put in locked15 at built.com for 15% off. Go to built.com.
And of course, thank you for making us your first listen. Why not make Locked On Now your second listen? Unique to the Locked On Podcast Network is that we have every single team covered in every single sport. So you can go ahead and get that league wrap up from all the local experts, and it's free, just like ours is on all those great platforms. Let's turn our attention to the late game rotations, because it's a two-part question. I want you to walk everybody through who is on the court for the closing minutes here, and then whether or not this is an egregious misstep or mismanagement by Steve Nash, or a product of what's available currently for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, so I think it's like both, right? So they're in the fourth quarter, where they the lead is slipping away. They have Patty Mills, Harden, and Durant. That's the lineup they're closing with, and they have James Johnson, and then they have DeAndre Bembry. That's the lineup that they're sort of closing with. Claxton's thrown in there, for a few minutes here or there, sort of depending on the situation. That looked like the lineup that they wanted to close with. I think I'm okay with that. Clippers are mostly pretty small. You don't need to have Claxton here. Thought it probably would have helped to have him, but okay. But the problem is where the lead starts to slip away, because the offense just wholly grinds down to a halt. They just can't get anything, and they're stuck in quicksand. The spacing is terrible. The Clippers have essentially packed the paint, because they're just saying, okay, we're gonna really sell out on Durant and Harden, and then if Patty Mills gets a 3, fine. And then it really goes off the rails when Patty Mills fouls out, because now they have no shooting. And Durant, and look, you and I talked about this during the game. We were tweeting about it too. So this was Durant's next quote, only follows up with sort of like everybody can see with their naked eye late in this game, is that when Durant during that presser said when Patty Mills fouled out, even the Clippers bench was yelling that the Nets were only down to 2 shooters.
Yeah.
So it's the thing that Nets fans can see, right? Because at this point, you only have Durant, and the 2 shooters are Durant and Harden, who you're already selling out against. You do not need to guard DeAndre Bembry, James Johnson, and then Bruce Brown, who comes in for Mills, at the perimeter at all. Frankly, you'd like them to just shoot threes if you're the opponent. And it was such a glaring problem for the Nets that even with these 2 guys, these 2 superstars, the spacing sucked. The shot attempts were just super bad, all things really bad for who they have on their team, like these 2 guys. And it was as big a reason for them losing as anything else. Like it sounds crazy to say, but they just could not generate offense with this group. And it was because the Clippers just knew they could sell out, and this wasn't good. There was no one that was going to hurt them at all.
Yeah, I'm confused by once you lose Patty Mills and then you go to Bruce Brown, and like you say, so now all you've done is surround your 2 superstar talents with a lack of shooting across the board. Now, I understand.
Well, real quick, the one thing about that is that they are probably just saying that we're just gonna hopefully just go full defensive upgrade. Like you're hoping to win with defense, but I'm still not for it. I'm just saying that it's not like they just threw in a guy who stinks at both ends. Like Bruce Brown is a big defensive upgrade over Mills, and continue on. But I want to say that real quick. It's like they didn't bring a total 0, because he gives a lot of defense, but it does not solve any of the offensive problems.
No, and yeah, so I understand the thinking on it, like you say, because and this is the problem too, because you get into this conversation and it's like we start talking negatively about Bembry, about Bruce Brown, and I mean James Johnson
Right.
to a lesser extension, but you start talking negatively about guys, but specifically because it's the area of their game that you're not supposed to be worried about, and now suddenly you are. So to that point, in theory, I get the idea that you're up 7 when Mills goes out and you think you should be able to sustain it, but you know that teams are selling out against Durant, selling out against Harden. And it just seems like the most logical thing to me is to find a way to maintain some level of spacing. Now, Nicholas Claxton isn't going to give it to you. And that you can basically say Claxton or Bembry, it's probably the same relative difference at that point of the game. But I would have brought LaMarcus Aldridge back into the game for the simple fact that he's a guy that can knock down the mid-range shot and provide a little bit of spacing. There's another layer deeper that I want to go with that. But I mean, is that reasonable to say if you put Aldridge back in the game? I know what he doesn't give you. I know that he's not fleet of foot defensively, but you do have Bembry out there with you, or you switch it up and you put in Bruce Brown, you take out Bembry, you keep in Johnson, you take out Johnson. You can do a lot of different things here, but I think that putting Claxton and Aldridge back in the game potentially, and that goes back to a bigger narrative about them playing together and how the sample size looked the game prior, but at least one of the two of them, I think, does make it look different, really on both ends of the floor for different reasons.
Yeah, I think at some point you have to say, well, it's really funny because like if you're saying, okay, we're going to go with this lineup for defensive purposes, well, that didn't work either because they dropped 40 on him in the fourth quarter. So it wasn't like it wasn't.
And by the way,
truly
quickly,
got the
if you're
worst.
if you're going to go defensive, then James Johnson shouldn't be out there and Claxton should be. Then that's the one. If you want to go full defensive lineup here and you bring in Bruce Brown for Patty Mills, then I take Johnson off the court and I put in Nick Claxton. I think that's the one that's the very obvious one. If you want to stay in the mindset of defensive, which is fine, then Claxton needs to be out there.
Well, they did do that eventually. Like Claxton did come in for the last like 3 or so minutes of the game, and this is when it already had kind of started slipping away. But it was he did technically close because he ended up coming in for Bruce Brown finally when they just needed to stop the bleeding and they needed like something to happen on the defensive end. So yeah, so it's one of these like worst of both worlds kind of things because it's like, well, you can't get any stops and you can't score, right? So it's and it's not rocket science. Like this is why they lost, but it's really this. It's kind of just this problem of like at this point the roster kind of is what it is in this iteration, and so there aren't any like short of maybe Cam Thomas who got a DNP and he might be conditioning like coming back from COVID. So I'll say that maybe that's why he didn't play, but it's startling how few 3-point attempts this team generates, like outside of those three guys. It's frankly, it's like where you really miss Joe Harris. This was a game, I think this is the first time I've really thought, man, Joe Harris actually probably would have solved almost all of this because like just by, I'm being serious, like just by himself.
But he'd be on the floor and he's a 3-point threat.
Exactly. Like even if he wasn't closing already and then Patty Mills got hurt and they just brought him back in. But like even if he wasn't part of that closing group, I really think actually him alone probably solves all the problems because he's such a threat from downtown. You cannot let him stay open. You have to close out on him. You actually just need to guard around him on the perimeter anyway. And that by itself probably just solves the whole problem. Because the thing is, when I look down at this list and I say, well, they didn't have any shooters. Well, you go down the list of guys they had available. There aren't any shooters here. Like there's no real shooters on this team. Like Kessler Edwards, Cam Thomas, these guys are coming back from COVID. I do not know where they are. I don't think they're going to start like closing with these guys all of a sudden. So I'm with you. I probably would have just tried something different because it's clearly not working. But it's just very obvious late that also was not going to work either. And so at that point, you probably just got to get a little weird.
Yeah, and that's fine. Again, and I'll even go the extra step of because I think it's a double switch there. And then I do want to get into what the options were and the restrictions around it. But I do think that if you get Claxton back out there, the other bonus, listen, we know what Bruce Brown is capable of on both ends of the floor, and he can surprise you in a lot of ways. But there's no way that he is going to be more effective, maybe getting some extra offensive rebounds, getting you a couple extra possessions than Nicholas Claxton would be capable of. So whether it should have been Claxton in there, not Bruce Brown at all, or any of those other Bembry or James Johnson, I think you just have to do something where you say, Claxton, gas yourself. Because by the way, like you said, he ends up ultimately coming in and just feels like maybe it's a hair too late. And you could have even gone possession, offense, defense with Aldridge and Claxton if you want to go that route too. But Claxton only plays 23 minutes. Aldridge only plays 21. So I just feel like there has to be, an opportunity there. Aldridge is who he is. He's older. But at this point, we can't be couching this in the idea of, well, is Claxton only a 20 to 25 minute per game guy? If that's the case, then he's got to get in better shape then, because it can't be that you can't afford to utilize him. So we're going to get into here in a second the shooting options. I think that's where I want to close this out. We can probably even reference back the game prior if there's an opportunity to do it. And that's because you mentioned them. So we have to definitely table it inside of the idea. Guys go into protocols, and for the most part, we said, seems like everyone's been healthy, and it's just a matter of the protocols. They come back out. So was Cam Thomas healthy and available in conditioning to play? We don't know. The guy that I look at, maybe even beyond him, is Kessler Edwards. And I want to assume that they weren't used because they were not technically available, because you go 4 guys deep. Griffin plays 7 minutes in this game, and the 1-to-1, and that maybe impacts how you approach when Patty Mills goes out, would have been Kessler Edwards to me. Everything about his game tells me that he's going to at least be capable on the defensive end, and he's the best shooter. He's the best shooter you have left after you lose Patty Mills. And I just wonder, even if it was die by the looks that Edwards was going to get, if you would put him out there on the floor, he would have had open opportunities. And out of Bembry, Brown, Johnson, Claxton, Edwards is the guy that I would want getting a couple of looks at the end of this game if that was the byproduct of rushing the defense at Kevin Durant and James Harden.
Yeah, I know. Real quick, I screwed up. I forgot. Cam Thomas played against the Sixers. It was only 4 minutes. So
he wasn't.
I take it back.
Right.
We're just gonna do a quick mea culpa on the idea that it was conditioning, because he had just played 2 games before, or at least was like they put him on the court. So okay, right. Take that back. So in that case, it really was just a full DMP. Yeah.
Now I'm even more frustrated then.
It is a little bit weird. I'm not ready to go. Kessler Edwards should be like closing basketball games mode yet. I don't think.
But this game, when this thing happens and you don't have Joe Johnson, you don't have Kyrie Irving, and you've just lost Patty Mills, and you have no other perimeter shooters. I'm not saying it's not. And now he's in the closing 5. No, but in this game, and by the way, I'll even go the extra layer on this, because I did think about this ahead of time around the idea of, okay, now you're going to tell me that Kessler Edwards is your knockdown perimeter shooter. No. But he's proven in a very small sample size that he's capable of slashing at the basket, and that he's also a very opportunistic rebounder. So I do think that that's also the bonus there, that he probably would have been able to give you enough on either end of the floor.
Yeah. You said Joe Johnson, by the way, who would be nice. The little ISO Joe back. I think you meant Joe Harris. But
I long for the days.
I think in theory, around what they were missing, I can go for it. I still probably am like hesitant to pull it. I can't blame Steve Nash for not going to Kessler Edwards like out of nowhere here. But I will say that over the last 2 games, the lack of perimeter shooting that this team has had outside of those 3 guys is so startlingly bad that it, like, other teams just kind of know it at this point, right? And now Durant and Harden are so good that they can just take away a lot of your warts. They will cover up and mask things that are wrong with your team. But in this game against the Clippers, I don't think anyone hit. I'm not sure anyone on the Nets besides those 3 guys. You said James Johnson. I thought you said Joe Johnson. Whatever. So he was the only one that actually even hit a 3 out of those other 2 guys, and they were like 1 for 8 from the rest of the group. Right? Like, that's really, really pretty damn bad. And then the game before, like, they were 1 against the Sixers. They were super bad just in general from 3 at 26%, 7 for 27, which is a huge reason why they lost. But they just couldn't even, against that Sixer length, because the floor spacing was troublesome at times. They just couldn't even generate 3-point shots, 3-point opportunities, right? Like, Durant goes 3 for 8, Patty Mills goes 1 for 8, Aldridge hit 1, Harden goes 1 for 5, and then Blake hits like a miracle 3, 1 for 2, and no one else even took any. And so when you're an NBA team in 2021, well, now 22, and you are generating so little around the perimeter, and then it's only around a very small concentration of players, like, at some point for teams that just becomes sort of easy to solve, right? Now,
Yeah.
Harden and Durant are so good that they will make up for it, and the Nets will still win games. And so it's like not the end of the world, but it's really kind of only because they're so good. Like
But
anybody else, if they any other team that generated this few 3-pointers with their team that did not have these two guys would be getting smoked.
well,
like
and by
basically
the
every
way,
single night.
it's like you talk about lack of perimeter shooting in this game. James Harden triple double. He's back in form and it's fantastic. He was
Totally.
3 of 11 from the outside. He's 33% from the perimeter this year, and he's only a 36% career 3-point shooter. So, like, I know that he can knock those down, but he is at best a streaky outside shooter. And there's still effective areas of his game when he's, dribbling down on someone at the top of the key, et cetera. Like, I know it creates opportunities, but inside of it, and Kevin Durant's not really a guy that wants to take a ton of triples. So, compounding it is that your two superstars are actually in the hierarchy of their skills. You list a lot of other things before you get to their perimeter game, which I think does make it a little bit trickier. You're going to get the two-man blitzes at them to get the ball out of their hands, et cetera. But even when you get an isolation possession, there's no guarantee. Like I think so defensively, if you're the Clippers, you kind of go inside out. Well, let's clog the lane first. What I don't want James Harden driving at the basket. I don't want Kevin Durant getting into the paint with ease. So let's just congest. And then, we'll live with somebody else takes a shot, of course, first and foremost, but we'll even live with Durant or Harden taking perimeter looks that are probably going to be contested because we can stay at home on our assignment. So it is a double down effect in terms of what you lose. And this is very much couched in the fact that you don't have Kyrie Irving as well in this. Now,
and that's like the other sort of like little, okay, when we get to the end of the sentence, we say the two guys that solve this problem completely are the two guys that are just not here. Is Kyrie Irving
that are currently on the team, right? Like it's like it's not like we have to go get a guy. We already have him.
Yeah, they have these guys that will be, hopefully soon available in some respect, right? We don't know. We'll see what happens here with Kyrie, and then hopefully Harris has a full recovery and he's kind of within a few weeks of the original timeline of coming back. Because again, like those two guys, the two guys that just happen to be hurt right now, or whatever are out, are the two guys that literally solve this problem almost completely. So because Harris is just whatever you want to say about him, he's one of the very best 3-point shooters in all of basketball. That is not a debate. Like that is just what he is. We can talk about why other Nets fans are frustrated with other things about him, but it's not that he's not a great shooter. He is really one of the very best in the entire game of basketball right now. So just having him alone, like just gives you optionality around that. And then Kyrie is just one of the all-time greatest, just individual scorers of all time. So playmakers of all time. So adding those two guys in will cure, a lot of that stuff, but there's clearly needs to be, I know that they're still experimenting with stuff here, and I'm fine with experimentation around lineups. I think this is still the time to do it. There have been a lot of combinations now over the last couple of games that just have not worked really, and it's at some point you got to say like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the overall plan? Like, like you said, where does Claxton fit in? Where do some of these young guys fit in? It looks like some of these other guys like Millsap and Javon Carter have probably played their way out of the rotation, at least for now. And I think that's correct. But I think I'm with you that if that's going to be the case, then you need to start going to some of these other guys that can at least shoot, right? Like Cam Thomas and Kessler Edwards, like that can shoot. If we're just agreeing that, this is sort of the central problem right now, there is like, I think I'm with you. Like there is like at least a short-term, let's try it and see solution.
Right. Because the reality of, remember the other player is Blake Griffin, and we said rest and then he comes back. But the big problem, not even around his game, wherever he's at right now, it's that as Nicholas Claxton gets more established and as Aldridge is in this lineup, Blake Griffin's value gets smaller and smaller and more diminished if he's going to knock down his perimeter shots at all, but he's not. And so if you take away that part of his game, he's a guy that can defend against some thicker bodies, and that's great, and take some charges, but that's not the thing that you need. You have enough pieces like that. And then when you take away his minutes and you look to James Johnson, you go, same kind of thing. Well, James Johnson, you're a little bit thicker and you can do a couple of things, but Bembry's already kind of established himself as this defensive guy, slasher on the offensive end. You need the shooting. And even when you get back Kyrie and you get back Joe Harris, you're still going to need that extra guy. Like you still need one more player that as you flex through these rotations, you can have an extra shooter there. And that's why I think the unknown of Kessler Edwards, of Cam Thomas, that's where you can have upside. I think the known around all these other guys, all the veterans, it doesn't get better. It's not like these guys tap into some unknown resource we're unfamiliar with over the course of their career. That's where I think the biggest frustration for me coming out of this game is the idea that you've been willing to experiment with things, and at the end of this game, just for fun. Again, I'm not putting too much stock into it, but it just felt like what a great opportunity to experiment with two of these young players as opposed to very known commodities. And specifically, I'll even say in that 5, James Johnson. I'll even give you the 1-for-1. Take James Johnson off and put in Kessler Edwards and see what happens, right? Like any of those opportunities, I think, especially in games like these, are ones that you should take advantage of. And Nash has shown the willingness to do it. I just wonder if you were correct. You said it, coming out when all the rookies and the young players went into protocols. If we saw them at a necessity and the coaching staff isn't as close to wanting to see what they have with them as I maybe hope. And that it was more just, hey, somebody's got to play. You guys are going out there. And as soon as we get these veterans back, it's right back to status quo.
Yeah, and look, and I'll close out on this. We're probably, honestly, not even talking about it if Patty Mills doesn't foul out. And, like, Patty Mills just never...
Because there's a stat in this game. Sorry, there's a stat over when the games when the Nets win, it's Patty Mills scoring 15 points and knocking down perimeter shots. And when he's not...
And usually those stats are dumb because it's like, yeah, of course, when other guys score a lot of points, you win. But the thing is,
right.
where that actually stat, and I usually kind of hate those stats because it's like, yeah, of course, like when your third best or whatever player scores a lot of points, you win. Like, no kidding. But it is just funny because like the way he scores is specifically the thing they need. And so it does make sense because when he's scoring like that, it means that their other pieces of the offense are probably working more in conjunction with each other. Yep. So I'm for that one. But I look back, Patty Mills hasn't fouled out in like years. Yes, like he barely even gets the 3 fouls on a given game. I think I found one game where he had gotten to 4 or 5 or something like that, and like it's just years and years since he fouls out. So I think that actually if he just
we got it.
Yes, keep your hands to yourself. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Thanks so much for making those YouTube subscribers. Those things continue to tick up, pushing toward 1,000. I'm gonna put the link in the show notes. All of our episodes and more are up over on the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Go jump over there, leave a comment or 2. We try to respond. You throw in there, have questions or just like cool comments. We try to jump in there and respond to as much as possible. So I'll put the link in the show notes. Like and subscribe over on YouTube.
And don't forget to check out Locked On Bets. It's your boy Q and expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. They got you covered there. Great show. Free, all the platforms. And guess what, guys? Maybe it was a bad loss on Saturday night, but it's always a wake-up call to be beaten. Usain Bolt.
Oh, one of the all-time and fastest poets around. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.